Hey there, cool cats. It's Wolfman Jack from American Graffiti. Not really, but it is Jack. Day 130 of a screenwriter's journey, left off right in the middle of this scene. Looks like I've backtracked just a hair, as I typically do. I would say it's very unusual. I would like to hear from you in the comments, or give me a call, even though you don't know where I live, which is probably good for both of us. Do you ever just literally start where you leave off and don't go back and look at kind of what you did and how you got there, kind of like a previously on XYZ TV show, where you sort of have to remind yourself? I guess if you literally like stopped writing at 10 o'clock at night and started at 6 in the morning, maybe not. But I almost always, even if I don't change anything, which I typically do, I go back at least a half a page, maybe to the beginning of the scene, maybe to the previous scene, depending where I ended, and then continue. And the other interesting thing is I would have to go back and look to see how often I finish a day's writing at the end of a scene as opposed to in the middle of it. Sometimes it can be a cliffhanger either way. If you're in the middle of a super action-y part, like in the latter part of your script, sometimes I'll finish a scene and then I'll start the slug line and then I'll purposely just stop, and then it sort of kind of wets your whistle to come back. And because very rarely, hopefully for everyone, but very rarely is like, oh, I've got to write that next part today. Oh, I've got to do it. Obviously, if you were on assignment and getting paid, I guess in one sense, since you're getting paid, you shouldn't be complaining about it, but you may have a tendency to look at it differently. If you're writing a spec script, which 99.9% of us are, and you can't get excited about it, I mean, that's bad news. All right, so we got a lot of dialogue going on here. And, yep, jumping around a little bit. I can already tell just by looking at the page count that I'm sort of off a little bit, although this part where Lexi says just rip off the Band-Aid, I mean, that's kind of a catalyst. But again, is she the protagonist? Maybe she will turn out to be. So I've gone back here and I'm working on sort of the lead up to where I ended yesterday, because as I alluded to, I often will go back and realize that something just didn't quite work, or I had a new idea that I want to go instigate, institute, insert. As long as it starts with an IN, that's the important part. So I don't know that this is important. I mean, it's probably important that Holly tell her this, but does the audience need to hear it? That's always a very good question. Sometimes you feel like you have to justify everything, every action, so the audience will buy into it. And I know in scripts I've written and in some of the movies I've made, people will watch it, like a rough cut. We'll do a screener or something, and someone will say, well, yeah, you wrote that scene, but just because you wrote it and you filmed it, it doesn't mean you need to include it, which is a whole different kettle of fish. But and it's usually something where I'm trying to explain something so it makes logical sense. And the consensus is sometimes that, well, Jack, it makes sense. People are going to make that leap of faith, or they're going to connect the dots. You don't need to connect everyone for them. So that's what I'm sort of in the middle of here, is how thoroughly does Holly have to tell Lexi about what happened to her mom and how she got to be in the place where they are. Certainly, there's some key stuff that is super important and it's going to affect Lexi's decision. But then it comes back to, would she really and truly wait so long to tell her, as opposed to dribble it out over a course of years, which would be very uninteresting unless you set up like a sequence, which would be totally bogus, where every year she gives her like a little bit more, like a drip, 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 which would be stupid. So I'm not going to try it, but you're welcome to. So now Holly's line there about she spent the next few years, that's really getting into the weeds. And I mean, I don't know how long I spent trying to come up with a reasonable way that she could purposely be arrested so she could tell the police what's going on, because I'm making it sound like that's literally the only way that she could get out of this mob family, was to go somewhere, get arrested, and then the police take her in. So I'm completely spelling this out. Is it necessary? I would say at the least, when you write backstory, in your script, at the least it's important to you, because it will help define character. And even if you don't use it, it's information that you didn't know before. Because, as I've said, when you write an outline, unless it's super extensive or you're given it a lot of mental thought, you really don't know your characters until you start putting them in a scene and letting them loose. I've said that a million times, but I'm convinced that that's super important. There may be some people, I'm sure there's amazing writers that do that all not in the script, but that's not me. Okay, since the fun is going to witness security. So now I'm back. It seemed like yesterday I was on page 15 at this time. So did I cut a bunch out, or maybe I'm just thinking wrong? So now Lexi's finding out, and this is not virgin writing. This is I won't say the phrase I'm thinking of, but this is going back through it. And so this is where Lexi has found out for the first time a little bit more about Holly. And then there's a whole question of why didn't Holly tell her about this sooner? Not just about her mom, but about her background and what she really does. And so that definitely needs some thought also. Okay, she thought we agreed to be, but so I'm obviously going to have to change some stuff here. It's funny, sometimes you try to write up to a certain point because you go, I want to keep that line of dialogue. So you write and you manufacture some contrived thing leading up to it, 3 or 4 lines or back and forth, and then you get to the part you want, and then it's like, yay, and then you realize, oh, that was a waste of time. All right, let's see here. She thought I agreed that it'd be a bad situation. Why did she take me with her? Okay, so here come the questions. The suspense is so great. I can't believe it says nothing. Says nothing. Obviously, that's whoops, I already erased it. I was going to say, you can say, doesn't talk, remains silent, stands mute, says nothing. There's a million different ways to say that. And again, it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, but when you're writing a spec script, you don't want to always use the same terminology or phrases, because then the reader would say, wow, this person does not have a good command of the language. Which, again, if the story's good, maybe the reader isn't even going to recognize that. So that is Lexi's big revelation about she didn't just want to get out of being married or whatever. There we go. She didn't just want out of the mob. She wanted out of motherhood. Or however I'm going to phrase that. Look at that. I turned it from a 3-line into barely 2. So the question, audience, or you guys might say, is, would Lexi really be able to figure that out based on what's been said so far? And I'm banking on yes. She's a pretty smart person. She has good powers of deduction. And yet when she says that, Lexi is looking for Holly for verification, and Holly is not giving it, because she doesn't know, because she doesn't want to speculate, or because she wants to get Lexi sort of hyped up and then she can say, would you like to ask her? And then Holly's like, what? I mean, Lexi's like, what? She wanted to see you. I've got this script formatted for its breaking dialogue over pages, which I thought I fixed, and I might have to go back and fix that because it's legal, obviously, acceptable, but I just don't like it. But sometimes it's for the best, especially if you have a really long block of dialogue at the end of your page. Okay. You want to see him? Wait, is that who you work for? Okay, so this, I haven't done any rewriting on this next part, and I apparently have walked away from my computer for a minute, and now I'm back. Okay. So my thought when I wrote this is that when Holly says, "Would you like to ask her?" Lexi's like, "Oh my gosh, she's here. She's going to jump out from behind a tree or something like that," which obviously is not going to happen. But I can imagine a teenager or anyone suddenly with the opportunity to do something, meet someone. It's like, oh my gosh, it's going to happen right now, which it typically doesn't. But I thought that might be kind of a cool bit. We'll see if it survives. Okay. Yep, we're going to delete some dialogue. If we waited, all right, so we're getting back to this. So I've purposely, as I may have said, I may not have, I'm trying to get Holly not to talk all the time. Like Holly's silence says otherwise, instead of offering up this big defense or denial of they would never do that. And she goes, oh, your parents are the most wonderful people in the world, and they only care what's best for you. So I'm trying to make it, and not just in this scene, but throughout, where Holly doesn't talk a lot. And I think I talked about that yesterday during that long day, that sometimes it's cool if you can just let the actors act with their expressions and their silence and their anger and all that kind of stuff. I think I mentioned this yesterday. I don't know if, in fact, because I think I've even asked the Deputy U.S. Marshal that I've been emailing with, if this is true, that she could get fired or she would be severely reprimanded or something. In this case, I'm insinuating that she would be fired if anyone in the service knew what she was doing, which may or may not be true. And Lexi is not super impressed by it, as you can say by that dialogue. And as you can also see by the black screen, which is not going to be black because I'm going to replace it with my title card, the day's over, day 130. I won't belabor the point except to say, see you tomorrow.